I'm standing before the provincial cenotaph in downtown Fredericton, New Brunswick. This Remembrance Day will be different than many previous Remembrance Days due to the existence of the COVID-19 pandemic. But I would ask you to notice that I'm standing before the Great War side of the provincial cenotaph, and there it lists the men who died overseas during the Great War in service of king and country. And you would notice the name of J. Murray McAdam here displayed on the cenotaph, and it was his Dead Man's Penny which I displayed yesterday in the course of the Countdown to Remembrance Day videos. As I mentioned, COVID-19 makes for a different sort of Remembrance Day this year, with reduced crowds and social distancing and the wearing of masks. And this reminds me of a story from 100 years ago, a little bit over 100 years ago, 102 years ago, when the original Armistice Day on the 11th hour and the 11th day of the 11th month, 1918, because then too there was a global pandemic going on, namely the Spanish influenza. And there was a gentleman from St. John, New Brunswick by the name of Walter Brindle, who was overseas serving his country. Now, Walter hadn't originally joined up to go overseas, but his 3 sons had. But as the casualty figures grew in 1915, even though he was in his 40s and listed as a shoemaker on his attestation paper or sign-up paper, he joined up and he too was overseas. Rather than being in the infantry due to his age, he was working with a construction battalion, particularly railroad building battalion in France and Belgium, building the railroads to move the supplies close to the front, the ammunition, the food, the water, everything which needed to keep hundreds of thousands of men on the sharp end during the Great War. On the armistice on the 11th of November, he survived the war and was looking forward to return home to St. John, New Brunswick. But things were not well on the home front at all. Indeed, as he was making his journey from France back to England, he received a cablegram in early December, and it contained tragic news. It told him of the death of his son and a daughter due to the Spanish flu, and also a letter which came a few days later informed him that his wife and remaining daughters were very ill. Although he and his 2 sons in Europe had survived the war, the front had switched from Europe to Canada, and while the killing was over in Europe, the dying was going on tragically in Canada. And tragically and ironically, his son Alfred, who had been discharged due to being medically unfit for overseas service, died on the actual Armistice Day, November the 11th, 1918. And his daughter, Violet, 2 years older, died 2 days later on the 13th of November, and she'd been sick only for 1 week. And so Walter and his sons returned home to St. John, New Brunswick, but they returned to a home which had been drastically altered. Not only had they been altered by the experiences of the Great War, but the home front too had been altered, and in this case primarily by the Spanish flu. And so in this Remembrance Day 2020, we can perhaps grasp and understand a little bit better, in the midst of our own global pandemic, the reality of life as it existed 102 years ago in New Brunswick. All was not well. It was a time of anxiety, it was a time of stress, and it was a time too of a global pandemic. Let us think on these things this Remembrance Day, and let the words "lest we forget" apply not only very appropriately to the men listed on this plaque, but also to those in the home front and what they underwent 102 years ago at this time of their lives and at this time of year. Thank you and good day.